Oh, hey, zombie fans. It's Reanimated podcast. This is Stuart. I'm in California. Joining me from New York and sounding like $1,000,000, H.A. Conrad. How are you today?
Mostly alive today, but pardon the voice. You may have to bear with me, but I'll muddle through. Managed to get some kind of cold or something. So the dulcet tones you hear are related to that.
If Reanimated podcast had a brand, it's that we muddle through and that we record sick, sunny, rainy weather. Be damned. We do our best. We're like the Postal Service. Uh, but hi, everybody. It's Reanimated. We're here to talk today about Bucket List of the Dead, Zom 100, or Zom 100, Bucket List of the Dead, and the animated series, anyway, of which there are 6 episodes on. No, there's more than 6. There's 10
Bummer.
episodes on Netflix, and today we're going to talk about the first 3 of those. For some reason, I thought there was an odd number, which is why I proposed we do 3 today, but I was wrong. And so that's going to create a slight issue later on, and that's fine. Muddling through as usual.
Yeah, we'll just do 3 this time, 3 next time, and then 4 to roll it out. To
Perfect.
close it out.
Perfect.
Be all good. Look at me
Before
using the maths.
Look at the maths. Before we get to the show, we've got a couple of pieces of news. It is, after all, 2 days before Halloween, and the news is very newsy, as we would expect. Although I would say there are a sprinkling more zombie walks and flash mob type stuff going on in the news today, anyway, than even in years past. And it might be COVID related and people coming out of their shells. But Key West has like some giant. It feels like there's a giant zombie walk everywhere, and then there's your average increase in zombie and horror news in general.
There was also a pretty ridiculous, um, clickbaity article about how would each zodiac sign survive the zombie apocalypse.
Oh boy,
They're stretching, just
they're,
saying.
they're stretching big time. There wasn't a ton of high profile zombie show news. I did dip a toe into an article about the return of Troy Otto on Fear the Walking Dead just to see how stupid it was, and it was pretty stupid. And then I read an Eric Kane column on how bad the show is now, and he's like losing his mind. But that's actually not a new thing. He's been pretty mad about it for years. So yeah, Fear the Walking Dead, I think, is in its final episodes. I feel like they've been threatening me with that though for years, and it's still not over. So I'm just waiting for those headlines to disappear. I think it's still going on some.
Yeah.
But in other news, we stumbled across a David Fincher interview. Listed in the Hollywood Reporter, but I think originally given to Variety UK or something like that, GQ UK. And he's talking about World War Z, the sequel, which he was set to direct. And he's saying in this interview, and this is like the body of the interview in Hollywood Reporter, is the sequel to World War Z would have been a little bit like The Last of Us, but he's glad that they didn't do it because The Last of Us has done it much better. Talking about parasites. I don't know that they were going to suddenly make them cordyceps zombies, but I'm also glad that they didn't do it.
I am too, but I'm also like really puzzled. Like, how would this have anyway? It doesn't make sense to me, um, but then he dropped a little tidbit that you spotted, which I thought was, kind of a hopeful thing. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but it's about making, the fact that the version that they made was nowhere near, like, wasn't even approaching the book. And he kind of hinted that they might be thinking about doing something a little bit more true to form. So that's kind of cool if it happens.
Yeah, I don't think it could ever be a film. I think it would have to be a
Oh,
series.
I think it would have to be a series. And when the movie came out, the film came out, I think you and I even talked about this, and it was like, and this was before sort of like all this stuff really, really took off, and that there were these huge budgets for it. And I think you and I had said like the only way that this could possibly work would be to do it as like a series.
Yeah.
But lamented the possibility of it just because of the budgets. And then here we are, The Last of Us. Anyway,
Yeah.
um,
It would
I
be a
would be
very
really,
different animal from a Last of Us
it would,
series,
but I
obviously.
also wonder certain things probably would have to shift just given things that have happened in the world, maybe, but maybe they wouldn't do that. But anyway, that would be a cool thing. I would like to see that. And I don't know if there's room for it right now, but maybe we'll see it down the line. So that's kind of a hopeful thing to
Yeah.
talk about.
Well, we'll keep our ears peeled for any more news about World Wars or yeah, World War Z being adapted, which would be super cool. A second article that seemed interesting was from CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, about Quebec horror films having a moment and whether or not funding will become more plentiful or easier to get as a result of this. And we've talked a couple of times in the last few years about uh, Canadian films, specifically from Quebec and in French. There was the golf course one that we just did this past 12 months. And then before that, Les Affamés, The Hungry or The Ravenous. Uh, and was there also another? Like
There was the blood what was it? The where the
Blood
director
Quantum.
yes,
Well, that
and
was that was like a First Nations thing more than a Quebecois, but yeah.
it was a First Nations thing, but I think that they may have gotten funding. I'm not positive, but I think they may have gotten funding through the Quebec thing for the arts or whatever as well.
Well,
But regardless, I mean, I would like to see more stuff come out of there. I think they're really trying to bolster and build um their this particular um like area of the arts, and they've always given quite a bit, but I think they're trying to build some things there, which there's always been a pretty like robust filmmaking business focus on the other coast, which is like Vancouver and Toronto. Like a lot of people film up there, but then, that's a little closer to California and Hollywood and things like that. But
dating all the way back to the X-Files, right? I feel like that was the first, well, maybe it wasn't the only show, but it was the one that let me know that that was where people would film because
yeah, and
every
I don't know if I mentioned to you, but Bill and I were like randomly rewatching because he'd never really seen the X-Files. And there's like a whole episode where Scully and Mulder end up in like that crazy mining museum place, which is like an old copper mine. And since the X-Files filmed, they have actually rehabbed that whole thing into like this pretty incredible museum. And but at the time, it looked like they were filming in this like pretty rough this very rough set because they had done nothing to it. And so that was definitely, I mean, it's been going on forever. They've been doing a lot of sci-fi and genre things on that side of Canada. So and I think, I think Quebec has a really good opportunity here because it's like kind of like a smaller area. They control a lot of that budget and they're kind of their own thing. So I could totally see stuff like this taking off. Do you think that there's been a little bit of a distaste for the horror genre there, that may have contributed to them not sort of doing that, and maybe they're a little bit open to it now that they've seen success?
well, this article talks about how the history of filmmaking in Quebec was more focused on documentaries for the longest time, and now has like turned to genre. And they were like, loath to fund genre projects for one reason or another. They, yeah, the only real reason they give for this switch is the fact that now there are two Montreal-based film festivals that are really focused on horror, which are Fantasia and I forget the other one. Oh, Spasm, which is a great name for a film
It is.
festival. So yeah, like the actual reasoning I think is a little ambiguous, but they're coming into it. And one of the films that's mentioned in this article, I think, has a really funny title, which is a humanist vampire. I'm only seeing the French version right now, but I'm going to try and just translate it. Oh yeah, there it is. Humanist vampire seeking consenting suicidal person is the name of this film that apparently is coming out right now. And that's what that's what drove CBC to write this article, and I think it's funny. I hope that Quebec continues to make horror films, zombie or not, and I do think that there's still a lot of so much room in that genre for metaphor and for driving conversations. So keep doing it, dudes.
Last but not least, you found this great article about a film that I hadn't heard about yet, but it's a zomedy, I guess, is what you would call it. or All You Need Is Blood, which is pretty funny. And it has Mena Suvari in it and Eddie Griffin in it, in addition to a younger set of a cast. And the stills look pretty good at least, and the description is like kind of fun. So I think we should definitely check it out when we're able to review this.
Yeah, I don't know that they have a release date, but there's a lot of good photos on this, good stills here, showing you kind of the idea. A strange meteor lands in his backyard and turns his deadbeat father into a brain-eating zombie. So, 16-year-old aspiring director teams up with his friends to create the ultimate student film. I like that premise. Let's see. Let's find out more about this film as time goes by. All You Need Is Blood, and that write-up is on Bloody Disgusting if anybody wants to find it. And that brings us to the end of our news roundup, even though there's a ton out there. So if you're like looking for zombie news, you don't have to go far. But we're going to get into Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead, the anime. These launched on Netflix this past summer and are based on a manga or a book and they've been adapted. So we're talking about the three episodes: Akira of the Dead, Bucket List of the Dead, and Best Friend of the Dead are the three episodes we're talking about. The show is extremely irreverent, but is also dealing with like serious issues. And I think the art style is really fascinating in the animation and the choices they're making with colors and things like that. What did you think of like all the bright like blues and colors that don't come out of dead bodies as far as I'm aware? It's like kind of abstracting the theme. What do you
It
think
is a
about it?
little bit, it is a little bit, but it's also a very like it's on point given some of the themes that they're talking about in this. And they're it's a very it looks beautiful. It's fun to watch. I really just like, and some of the themes that they're talking about, there's definitely commentary going on here. So we're following Akira Tendo, who's like the main um character of this that we're following, at least at this point. It's gonna probably, we've seen a couple points of views of other characters, but he's like the main person. And he's been, it starts out all very like happy for him. He started out at this company he's really excited about, but it turns out to be a black corporation, which in Japan is basically an exploitative corporation, where they just really don't follow labor laws. And in this, he's like working all the time and basically is wishing for a zombie apocalypse so that he doesn't have to go to work. And part of how they reflect his misery at work is like everything's monochrome and like gray and black and white, like very, very desaturated. And then the backgrounds are also like almost like photorealistic too. Like, so there's like this cool look to the whole thing. Um, and it is, I think that what you're talking, like the sort of like color palette when once they get into it, that is a very like it's I don't want to say it's like a fantasy, but it's like just shows the contrast between the life before and life now. And it's like this weird thing because it's like even though life before had no zombies, life now has zombies, and this character is sort of like having a new lease on life, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, it's like edited, very fast moving, and like they do like they kind of like sort of swing between like there's slow motion shots so that you can like the whole sort of way that the it is edited and put together is so that you're like from the narrative perspective, they really want you to focus on different things or not on different things. And I think it's a pretty amazing little piece of work. Um,
Yeah. It is interesting, and for people who maybe aren't familiar with this concept of an exploitative company, they sum this up pretty well in the story by having his first day of work turn into basically a 48-hour shift of
yeah.
maybe more. He goes to work on his first day of work and then basically doesn't leave for 2 days. And you get the impression that that's just happening throughout the first 3 years that he's there, and he's increasingly unhappy and kind of in a fugue state. and which leads to what you were describing, HU, with the monochrome palette and
Well, yeah, it's not just that, but it's also like they're showing that he isn't living like the other parts of his life. Like, so even in his apartment, it's all full of garbage because he hasn't had time to take it out. And like, he also doesn't seem to have the power to break free of this cycle. And so they do a really good job, I think, showing the passage of time because it's like you see that first couple of days and then you see it kind of flip forward to year one, year two, and year three. And it's pretty, I like considering that these episodes are only like 24 minutes, 25 minutes long, they do a really good job at the narrative and moving this narrative in that way and showing that passage of time in just a really neat way, I thought.
yeah. So in the office, we've got a couple characters that we are introduced to. There, well, sort of. There's the CEO, uh, who I don't think we have a name for. He just calls him CEO. There's the CEO's side girl, also Akira's crush, who is Otori or Miss Otori, Sayori Otori. And then there is the middle manager whose name I am not remembering at the moment, but who is kind of I feel like he's going to show up again later in the show, probably. He seems like a bad enough dude. And he's like the one who's really laying putting the hammer down and screaming at everybody and making people cry.
Yeah.
And this, honestly, this part of the episode is more than half of it. It takes, for a 25 or so minute episode, you don't get to the zombie apocalypse till the last couple minutes because you're
Right.
really just laying the groundwork for why he acts the way he does for the next several episodes. I feel like you have to know exactly how despondent he was, so that when the zombie apocalypse breaks out and he's just elated, you can, you're not confused as to why he was so unhappy. He was basically thinking about killing himself. So when, so yeah, once when the day comes that he's like having to go into work, and this very Shaun of the Dead moment where he's basically trundling to work and notices that zombies have taken over his apartment building, or that his landlord is now a zombie and he's running away from zombies. But at the same time, he's cheering and having a new lease on life. It makes sense, perfect sense.
Yeah, and there's this like even before all this happens, he was watching zombie films and basically almost wishing that a zombie apocalypse would happen, that it was better in the zombie thing. So they give you a lot of like, you know, like they're laying the groundwork already. And so when it happens and he's just like, running for his life and trying trying to like make sense of all of it, he's really excited and elated and kind of manic. And immediately when all this happens, suddenly the color totally changes. And he even says it. He was like, I was seeing everything in black and white, and now the world is full of color and how beautiful. And they do this as he's like running from a zombie horde
Yeah.
and has to jump off a building to get rid of, like, he jumps into a tree or something like that. And it's like this really interesting juxtaposition of him fighting for survival, but also being incredibly joyful that he doesn't have to go to work anymore, which shows you how miserable he was.
The perspective doesn't even really feel like he is fighting for his life. Like that,
Oh, it's joyful. It's like,
the stakes don't feel at all grim. He's just excited, because clearly he has no like personal connection with any of these people, until later he sees one zombie who he knows, or two. So it's kind of a weird, yeah. It's like a strange perspective. And up in the second episode, he is introduced to two people, and then when he comes back to see them again later, they've been killed presumably, and then he's like the only somber moment of these three episodes that we've seen, I feel like.
well, I don't think only because when he goes, he's now like, okay, I can't, I've got to take chances. And the big thing is that Miss Otori is the thing that was probably keeping him at the job, is because he had a huge crush on her. And so he goes to basically confess his feelings to her, and it runs into the crazy CEO and like throws his zombified self off the balcony. And there's a whole like almost, I don't want to say like slapstick way of how they manage the scene, because they like make the zombie really huge and he's like slipping in his own like bodily fluids and stuff, and he's pretty massive. And then Akira basically throws him off the balcony and gets all ready to sort of like share all of his feelings, and then realizes that Miss Otori is also a zombie. And there's a heartbreaking little moment here because he missed his chance, and this is not going to end the way that he thought it would. And like it ends, and it, even though it's very sad, it's also kind of, I don't want to say comical, but there is a little bit of black humor here where he's like, goodbye, my first love, and she's like running after him in like a weird zombie way.
Yeah.
um and
I,
so
I just didn't I didn't read that as being really sad because there was also the element where she was the mistress of the CEO. And I feel like there's a bit of judgment there from the show and
oh,
from even
definitely.
so, it was like, yeah, it's a bummer, but also he bounces back pretty quickly. I guess that's
Well,
true of all the ups and downs that he has so far.
like with anime, like there's moments, and so you have to kind of like, there's the moment when he realizes that she's a zombie, and he like kind of freezes up, and it's kind of quick, but it is sad. And but then it's moving on because they're going to move along the narrative. So, and you're right, there's probably a bit of moral judgment there for her. But that's what kind of inspires him to do his Zom 100 bucket
Yeah,
list.
because he makes this. I don't know if this is a quote or something, but he says this thing. There's nothing guaranteeing tomorrow. We could die today or 60 years from now. Either way, we need to. And then I lost track of what I was writing down. I just
Yeah,
wrote down "make it
he does
happen," but
it a few times. Like
he
this is
says,
the
yeah,
theme.
he says that again in episode 2. But he's like, I need to, start making a list and taking care of business. I need to do things, and that's kind of the end of the episode.
Yep.
That's Akira of the Dead. They go by pretty fast, these episodes. Episode 2 is Bucket List of the Dead, and here he really writes down his list. But first, the episode begins with it is here where he writes down his list, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Um, First, the episode begins with him cleaning his apartment, and he's like, that's the first. I mean, that makes sense. His apartment was disgusting. There was no floor space available. It was just garbage bags and empty food containers everywhere. And then he realizes he's out of beer. His only plan for the day was to drink beer, and maybe that was like the first 3 things on his list. Because here's my beef with this on Netflix. HA, I don't know if you're having this problem, but they're not translating any of the writing.
No, they are not. And I actually looked it up to see if you could find it. I haven't successfully found something yet, but
It's got to be
agreed.
somewhere, man.
It's
Like,
gotta
because
be
it's
somewhere.
they slowly linger on this page of a written list, and I can't see what any of it is. And he's crossed off the first 3 things by the end of this episode. So I'm assuming it was like clean your house, drink some beer, go see Otori. I don't know, something along those lines. And yeah, I want to find that too, because there's a whole list of 33 things on this first page that we don't get to see. But as he's like, oh, I'm out of beer, I got to go get more beer. And he goes down the drain pipe. That's where he meets his neighbors on the building across, like the building next door, who are the Kosakas and Kosaka. Yeah, Japanese pronunciation. I'm not good at it, but something along those lines. And they are having like a very serious zombie apocalypse. They're like, oh, we're gonna die. We have to hold out for one more day. And then they go out to the balcony, and there's Akira coming down the drain pipe, and they have like a lighthearted interaction. And then he's like, hey, I'm going to the store for beer. Do you guys need batteries or toilet paper?
Yep.
And he's like, sure, okay. And then he goes off on his bike and leaves them back there.
Well, and
Uh,
they're in a point where they're at their wits' end, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we're gonna die like this, whatever." And then suddenly he's like hanging out on the drain pipe, and they're like, "Oh." And so it's like this weird moment. And his sort of mania, his he keeps saying, "Oh, I'm gonna take this vacation. I'm gonna do all the things that I want to do." And I think appreciating the smaller things, which I think is what the beer is about, and getting to do whatever he wants to do is a piece of this. But there is definitely, he's being very flip about the fact that he's like not totally discounting the fact that the zombies are down there and he's going to go get beer, but he's like, it's so important that I do this and I'm going to do it anyway. And he's being very like, oh, can I get you anything at the store kind of a thing. And it's kind of this absurd interaction between him and his neighbors who have not seen anybody. And he hasn't really seen any survivors either at this point. So that's kind of like a funny, weird thing. And then he meets yet another survivor very shortly after this, who kind of calls him out on how sort of ridiculous he's being, or how he is not taking some of this totally seriously. Um, and we see his side of it in this episode, and we see her side of it in the next episode, I think.
I
Um,
think it's even in this one.
in this one,
But yeah,
sorry,
but
it moves by so quickly. So
these two characters are so much of hashtag alive, which we watched a couple years
yeah, I
ago.
was going to say it feels very much like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, because the main, male character in that is just like a shut-in gamer who is also, kind of surviving by accident. Because and then the woman that he interacts with is like a real dyed-in-the-wool survivalist. And here we have another situation like that where this woman, well, when we see it from her perspective, she's always just thinking about like everything pragmatically, while he's prancing into the store singing a dumb song about beer, which is also kind of, there's also kind of a self-awareness with him, even in the midst of his mania, where he's like, oh yeah, I was just singing a really dumb song about beer. And then he kind of prattles on to her. And it's very interesting to see the same scene played out from her perspective, because she's clearly not listening to a word he's saying. But
Nope.
I don't know. I enjoyed this a lot. I'm not sure how she could tell where that truck was going to come through the wall. Uh,
Well,
but
she had
it's
her little camera, remember?
Yeah, but I mean, I'll put it down to anime. She
Yeah,
knew like down to the inch where everything was about to happen.
right.
So he does only get beer. He doesn't actually get batteries or toilet paper for the Kosakas. And on his way home, he switches. Well, his bike has been destroyed by a truck coming through the convenience store wall, and goes to a scooter, and
Yep.
then upgrades from the scooter to like a chopper. And that's now those are his wheels, because apparently the zombie apocalypse happened during rush hour. So he's like, all these cars and things have their keys in them, and this is great. I can just get around everywhere I want to go. So
Yep.
it's kind of fun. He's just continuing to have a great time.
Yep. And then you're right, is in this episode, but we do a flip and we get to see a little bit more about his mysterious woman survivor. Um, and she is basically very disciplined. She's taking it seriously. She's got like a whole list of things that she's doing, like working out, cutting sugar, all this other stuff.
Cutting sugar. Yeah, because
Yeah,
then she doesn't get the mochi at the store.
yeah, yeah. And she's regretful of it. And,
She
she's got everything kind of planned. And so you see a little bit from her perspective that like Akira's being very like I don't want to say unprofessional, but not taking things seriously. And she's like, I can't really band myself with you because you're taking too many risks.
she
And
also has that giant stack of zombie movies, and she's
yep,
watching them too to like take notes,
yep,
which I thought is like, okay, sure, I mean, it's probably scientific, but it's also just zombie movies are just speculation. So, but maybe she'd find something interesting in there. But then after she watches it, she goes to her window and looks out with her binoculars and starts to categorize the kinds of zombies she's seeing, which is smart, slow, fast, and quote unquote dangerous, which I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. But those three categories according to her. Uh, and actually, this turns out to, I did not realize that we were looking at seeing what she was doing before she went to the store and met with Akira.
yep,
So it's after this that she goes to the store. We get that whole playback through her perspective.
yep.
And yeah,
And
and then that night she's thinking like, I wish I'd gotten that mochi, because dropping sugar apparently is not one of the things she's happy about having done.
yeah, and she has a little Akira flip back where she's thinking about him, so she hasn't totally ruled him out. So even though she says she has, but
Yeah, she's interested in how happy he is.
yep, because just beer or something like that, she's like, oh, what a ridiculous thing. But maybe he's got a point. And so she's thinking about her little mochi, and maybe she should loosen up a little bit in the zombie apocalypse, I suppose. Um and then
That's kind of the whole episode. It goes by quickly. Uh, a lot, yeah, it's only 24 or 5 minutes. Best friend of the dead comes to us next, and this one, she's not in this one at all. It's a bunch of new characters. Oh,
yeah,
and Akira.
this is Shu and or Show, and it's
Kencho.
yeah, but they have a club, Showtime, which I assume is his club since his face is all over everything. He's trying to reassure this little survivor and says he'll be back. And basically, they've been kind of trapped in the club and want to like him and a group of people go out to defend the club, and so they are doing their fighting. And then there's another, like it flips to Akira again, where suddenly he's getting like text messages all of a sudden, and it's this thing like, oh, I was out of touch with everybody for 3 years, and now I'm gonna be in touch with them. And then it dawns on him that everybody's probably dead, except for some reason he thinks that his friend Kencho is still somehow alive because he's too cool for school and was part of his rugby team. Um, so and that is actually this is like interesting. Again, there's a little bit of like moral judgment here, but he is trapped in this club, and it's like he's in
But
like an
a different club, right? This is a sex club, not Showtime.
yeah, this isn't Showtime. This is something else. I forget what it was called. But he's in a room, and this woman has been like, she's strapped to the wall so she can't hurt him, but she's zombified. And he's pretty like in a bad way and has only had water, and then, out of the blue hears from Akira. But before that, he started thinking about Akira, just about how he always laughed at everything he said. And so this is like a lot, the sort of like a flashback to their friendship, which is basically involves Akira laughing at him, his jokes. And
But
then
his jokes apparently only involved him being naked. Kencho likes to get
yeah,
naked.
he does, and this is an odd thing, this theme.
This might be some context that we're not picking up
Yes,
on.
I don't
Maybe
know.
getting nude is really funny in Japan.
Maybe this was like a kind of a funny thing. And Akira basically calls him in the nick of time and says he's going to come and get him, and comes up with a pretty he's going to go to Shinjuku, which if you aren't familiar is a very like packed like district, and has like as one of my friends used to say, like they dye their eyeballs there, and it's like, pretty much anything goes. So it's just like people are like kind of, there's these kinds of like themed clubs and things like that, but also like just people go to hang out and like people watch there, and it's just kind of like a wild area of town in Tokyo. And a lot of people, which is the point. So it's going to take a bit to clear them. I think based on what they did here, I think there'll probably be even more people than this, but you know, Akira basically attracts all the zombies away from his friend, and also inadvertently saves Sho, who's the only one I think that's alive out of his little merry band of defenders.
Yep.
Um, and and then hilarity ensues, and this is the context that I don't fully understand. But there's like a lot of confessing going on, confessing from Akira, who says, you told me to quit my job and I didn't, and I was jealous of you. And then Sho is like, no, my
No,
job,
Kensho,
sorry,
not Show.
Kensho was like, my job was garbage too, and I made it up, and I was like a jerk. And like there's like a lot of like friendship bonding or rebonding and apologizing, and I don't know.
It's more of this like mania that you were ascribing to Akira, where
Mm.
they both are just so emotional. But I think this is also an anime thing,
Yeah, it
where
is.
you can't have like small emotions. You only have the biggest emotions possible, right? So they're both freaking out and crying and yelling at each other in the hallway when all the zombies come back. And so they run up to the roof, block it with air conditioners, and then you know, Akira is never really worried about what's going to happen next. And so he just kind of is like, don't worry about it. We're going to jump to the next roof. It's across the street, but it is lower. So, maybe that makes it possible. Maybe the street's super narrow, but it's kind of hard to tell. He does it. He rolls and ends up really bloody, but makes it across. And then Kensho, that's when Kensho, is that when Kensho makes his admission? Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like he's like gathering his strength or what, saying, I can't even do it. And
And
he's like, go
and
ahead.
Akira is like, this is like what you do. This is zombie apocalypse. There's nothing holding you back now, man. And then
You
he
want
like
to be a stand-up comedian, then jump across and do something really funny, or tell a funny joke while you do it. I think is his advice.
and Kensho jumps across and somehow divests himself of all of his clothes mid-jump and lands on the side of the building. And it like then weirdly like Akira saves him and then they're like sitting by a fire, both of them naked.
Yep,
Um,
but I mean, also Kensho does scrape his balls,
oh,
which
there
is
you have
worse than getting bitten by a zombie, according to him.
it.
So the humor here is more than a little bit childish, but yeah, like maybe that's just the relationship that these two guys have, and they're 3 years out of college, so they're fairly young. At least that's the impression. Um, yeah, but yeah, they do end up on a roof, eating and drinking beer. I'm assuming that means they've made it back to Akira's home because that's the same beer that he had at his place, but maybe not.
Maybe.
And they're just talking about the good old times, uh and Kensho has this theory that dropouts are geniuses and maybe you're going to save us all. And I feel like that's kind of the thesis on
Yeah,
some level.
like Akira is definitely like the Shaun of the Dead in this whole scenario, right? Like that
Yeah,
guy totally frustrated and pinned in his job and his life, and this is his moment to shine. So, um, yeah, so we'll have to see what else happens because I guess we're gonna see a little bit more of our other characters in the next few episodes, but
yeah,
we'll leave
because
and
show's story we don't even see the end of. All we see is that he's about to get eaten and then they leave because Akira has drawn the zombies away. Maybe we'll get to see more of that story. Maybe not. Show feels like one of those anime characters who's like too cool for school, kind of a big deal. So I'm sure he'll come back. And there's 7 more episodes, which is a great number. Um, don't know why I thought it was like 9. Anyway,
oh good.
Zom 100 Bucket List the Dead. We will try to find out what that list says
I
later,
have
or
done
we could just wait for it to narratively like happen and not worry about it. But
I have like looked in a bunch of places and I cannot find it, but I will try to do more digging.
it's also frustrating when he's looking at his phone and they're not translating any of the messages he's looking at. I feel like this is kind of standard,
Yep.
but it's a little frustrating. Anyway, this is Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead. If you're enjoying the show, let us know. Give us a holler. You can email us at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. And you can find our episodes on Podbean at reanimated.podbean.com. I hope that everybody has an amazing Halloween. Get out there and trick or treat or dress up. Are you dressing up this year, HA?
I am under the weather, so probably not.
Are you gonna dress up as a person lying down in bed, taking it easy?
Yes, that is what I'm gonna dress up as. Halloween is pretty serious in our neighborhood, so we have the candy ready to go. There was some trick or treat, a lot of trick or treat stuff like yesterday, but there's usually like that and the day of, so we'll see what happens. But everybody was out in full regalia last night, in costume on the subways and things like that. So some pretty good things. I saw we saw a guy that was dressed like the dodgeball, like one of the dodgeball teams. He had like the dodgeball uniform and
Nice.
thought that was pretty good. Lots of Beetlejuices out there. Beetlejuice Eye.
Definite
And
resurgence for the Beetlejuice.
I actually interestingly saw like quite a few like Pokemon and Pokemon like handlers.
Oh,
Pretty good.
yeah. I'm gonna be a Pikachu.
Oh, who's gonna be your handler?
Nobody. Nobody. I will not have. I will be a free and a wild Pikachu.
You will be a one out in the wild, more valuable. Speaking of, did you hear that they had to shut down the Van Gogh sort of promotion at the Van Gogh Museum, where they had the Vincent Van Gogh Pokemon card?
No.
And well, they had Pokemon basically doing like a portrait, like that's what the card looks like, and it's in the style of Van Gogh. And I guess it was so wild there that they had to like stop it because people were like immediately going and like selling the cards on the interwebs.
Oh
And
boy.
like it would just cause mayhem at the Van Gogh Museum. So anyway, all good. But Any other cool things going on out in the West Coast for Halloween that you know of, like
Oh,
celebratory things?
I don't know. I'm just trick or treating with children. That's about as cool as I get.
Do you do like just the neighborhood, or is there like
Yeah,
party
yeah.
stuff?
We just do the neighborhood. We'll do an adjacent neighborhood. My neighborhood doesn't have a lot of houses that are trick or treat happy. Instead, we there's like this one street. I swear to God, everybody who lives on that street has to spend $1,000 on candy every year. Kind of
Hmm.
unfair, but it's the it's the best street to trick or treat on. So I'll be
Well,
out there with a little stormtrooper and Mal from Descendants,
nice.
um, and then I will be in a giant inflatable Pikachu. So
I'm still saying, I think you could find somebody to be your Ash, to be your and make them like capture you. This would just cause all sorts of hilarity.
hilarity for sure.
Um, all right, well, enjoy all of that, and I look forward to talking with you about the next three episodes.
Totally. Okay. Well, thank you for listening and toodaloo.
Ciao.